Hi, my name is Sabu Francis. In this video, I will be explaining what TAD is all about in terms of where it fits into society and how people could get interested in using TAD. I'm going to describe the context in which TAD grew and how one could see whether that context is applicable to you also, and then see if you can adopt the use of TAD. TAD, of course, stands for the Architect's Desktop, and by now, possibly you know about this particular software. It is now listed as one of the top 10, and in some listings, it is even one of the top 7 architectural design software in the world. Now, to understand this particular topic, I would request you to pay attention because I will be covering a little width of set of issues which I think needs to be known. That is a software which really doesn't work like regular software which architects are used to. Architects tend to use software such as AutoCAD and now lately certain BIM software like ArchiCAD and Revit. These are all the kind of buzzwords which exist in the particular community, and people tend to believe that that's the kind of status quo, and why should we go around understanding all these things so deeply? Because I'm an architect after all, why should I be so worried about all these things? But bear with me, and I'm sure there will be some points which will emerge which are pretty relevant to the way the world works. Now, when you talk about architecture to architects, we have to understand the difference between aspirations of an architect. An architect may aspire to do projects such as this one, which I will be showing here on this video, or this one, or even this one. But the practical reality is that architects, by and large, especially in developing countries, are going to do projects such as this one or that one or this one, which is there on the screen in front of you. Now, so let us be realistic. I am not going to sit and quarrel with architects with their aspirations. Even I have aspirations as an architect to design great buildings and museums and airports, and I hope that at some point in my life I would be given an opportunity to do such projects. But a bulk of the architects are saddled with a pretty intense set of demands which society imposes on them. And architects do play a very important role because the architecture which emerges out of these architectural practices, they actually can make or break society in very fundamental ways, because architecture is a fundamental subject. It's like the second skin which everybody needs to be within. If you were to look at a survey of architectural practices all over the world, you find that the bulk of architects are very small firms, people who have just 3 people and 5 people. In one survey in the US, there are about 25% of the architects registered there are just single person companies. Now, if US has that, and possibly the statistics would be similar in many countries. I know for a fact that in India, my own practice and many practices I know, they are very small practices. They are not very professional in terms of the business practices which they adopt, for various reasons which I don't want to get into, and I'm sure the audience here would understand what I'm talking about. Now, only about 3% was the statistics, which is really like 49 people or 50 people and more members. Like that's like a very tiny amount. Now, even 40-45 people offices are pretty large offices. So even if I exclude that, you can safely say that about 60-70% of all the architectural work which is emerging from practices are from very small practices. And we need to understand what is happening in these small offices, because these small offices are struggling with what I call, in India we use a term called the chakra view, the whirlpool inside which we get stuck, of various things which we have to do firefighting with, whether it is people issues, money issues, family issues, what have you. they all bring down the energy of an architect who's trying to do his or her own best to the world, and but there is this force which pulls it down. One area where there could be some help, and which is where I believe I got into this particular subject of writing software for architects and architecture, is in the way we use tools. Tools can fundamentally change the way something happens, because a tool is like an extension of your mind and your hands, and with the right tool you can probably go a long way, or at least you can say that you may not make so many mistakes. With the wrong tool, for sure you can make serious mistakes, because you cannot be using the wrong tool for something as important as architecture. Now, to understand this and where TAT fits in and why is it that it is so unusual, I need to kind of digress a little bit and give a metaphor. I come from a small state right at the tip, bottom tip of India, called Kerala, and there we have this very nice healthy morning dish called puttu. If you get a chance to eat this, it's a wonderful dish. It's very healthy. So it's traditionally made in a bamboo tube, and inside that tube they stuff rice flour interspersed with coconut gratings, and the whole thing is steamed up. There is no oil which is used, and once it gets cooked, the tube is taken out, and I have this short video which explains that. Then the cook actually puts in a rod and prods it from beneath, and out comes from the other end of the tube this delicious dish which you can eat with various curries and stew and all that. You should try it, it's pretty nice. Now, what I believe is that one way to model society is that society anywhere would have this vertical stacks of intellectuals of various fields. So you'll have a stack of writers, you'll have a stack of painters and artists and musicians, and like that you'll have a vertical stack of architects also. And each of this stack, it gets cooked, and there's a pressure which is built up inside that stack, and that pressure starts right from the bottom of that particular tube, and all the way it comes out at the top. Now, when the pressure is applied from beneath, what comes out from the other end would be the first lot of people who are coming out free from that pressure very fast. So the top layer, the creamy layer of that particular stack, would be those architects who get really notable commissions, such as airports and museums and what have you. So these architects, you can say, they are a little fortunate, and they get these commissions because of their presence and their contacts and their networking or what have you. And they get these projects, and they are, in one sense you can say, they are predestined to have some certain amount of fame. Obviously, if you are getting a museum or an airport to design, whatever you do, I'm a little harsh here, you are going to be famous for the fact that you did that particular unique particular project over there, because a city will not have hundreds of museums or thousands of airports. What happens to the people below in that stack? So in any of this intellectual stack, there you will find that there are lesser mere mortals at the lower parts of this particular stack, and they are doing projects which they really cannot dictate any terms to. Neither are those projects very famous, but bulk of the projects which gets done in architecture would possibly fall in that category, especially in developing countries. And this is by and large true. I would say it is always true in all developing countries, because I have been talking about all these effects with a lot of colleagues from other countries also. And everywhere the situation basically is this econo-social situation which you find in developing countries, because they are developing countries, they're not developed countries. So there is this vertical stack of pressure which gets built up, where there are the notable people right at the top, or rather the people with notable projects at the top, and the lesser notable ones, the mere mortals, are at the bottom of that particular stack. Now, if you examine what is happening right at the bottom, you will find that there is this need for that person to climb up that particular stack. It's a natural process. So he or she would want to now apply enough intelligence into their projects and deliver better quality, so that they have a game chance of overtaking the guys who are above them in their architectural practice. Now, if you think that this particular analogy is not very understandable, try to look at it in this way. Think of a small island where you have very few number of people, the number of the population is small, and therefore there would be very few number of writers over there. And if one of them happen to write a little bit better and writes a novel which is not particularly very good in terms of other countries, but in that particular country there are no other writers over there, the chance of that particular writer being recognized is higher. So what I'm meant to say is that that vertical stack is there everywhere, and the type of quality which emerges right at the top would actually be based on how much of a pressure is applied from beneath that particular layer to the left by the layer below, and it goes all the way right from the bottom all the way up that particular stack. So if the lower parts of that particular stack is not very demanding or is embroiled in all kinds of issues in day-to-day firefighting of running their practice and people issues and money issues, obviously there is no real pressure which is getting developed over there. So the layers above is not really feeling any great pressure, and therefore the topmost layer, which are those layers which do get notable projects, they also really do not perform too well. And that's probably one very good reason why developing countries are not really notable for really world-class architecture, because this stack is a pretty immature stack and it is continuously safeguarding its own layers interests because of their firefighting which is going on in that layer. I got this particular observation when I was working with a very notable architect in India. His name is Hafiz Contractor. He's a very nice guy personally, and he's considered as one of the topmost architect in terms of the prolific work which he has. I asked him once why is it that his project, though he has got so much talent, is not really so academically nice. I mean, it's not really something which people are very happy with in terms of its architectural qualities. And he gave a very honest answer. He said that nobody is really giving me any great pressure from beneath. So why should I do? I'll do a little bit better than what others are doing, and that's good enough for me. And that's probably one way to look at the way athletic race happens. A guy who's winning a 100-meter or a 400-meter race or whatever race is not wanting to conquer the guy behind him by some 100 meters or 10 meters. He just have to just get that little bit better and he has won the race. And that's what happens in this vertical stack. So if people at the lower level are not in a position to apply that pressure, there will be not enough pressure which is coming out, and therefore the entire quality of the entire stack will suffer. There is actually a very interesting case study. You can take a look at it. I'll give the link on this video later on when I edit it, which is a small little micronation somewhere near New Zealand and Australia. It's a small, I think 21 square kilometer country. I think it's named the Nauru or something like that. I am not very good at pronouncing that name. If you look at that particular video, you will see how that particular country actually rose up a little bit and then collapsed because of this quality problems which these intellectuals posed over there in that particular country. So what I'm talking about is not really some kind of figment of imagination or just an arbitrary theory. It really does happen, and that's how you get how these stacks of intellectuals work. So if you really look at any society, you will find stacks of writers or even doctors. There will be a stack of doctors, and you will see architects, you will see poets and writers, and everywhere you will see this effect of this this vertical stack of quality, if you want to call it. So this put effect is there in all societies everywhere, but in developing countries it is a lot more critical. And in developing countries, what really needs to be addressed are the bulk of the people who are not really at the top but at the lower levels of that particular vertical stack. And that has been my emphasis, and for very good reasons, because it has got two advantages. One is that the architects working at the simple architects who are just one person or person or 10-person companies, they can actually deliver something of really good quality over there and therefore have a game chance of climbing up that stack. And the second advantage is society also improves because that pressure continues and therefore it will get felt even for those notable projects. So instead of having an airport which only the local population over there admires, you may actually get in countries like India really beautiful and very noteworthy architectural projects of international repute, which currently is not happening in such countries. So this is the way to look at the context inside which TAD works. TAD was not meant for the people who are already at the top in that particular vertical stack. I mean, they can also, of course, use it, but that's not the focus. The focus is to give a very reasonable solution for all those firefighting architects right at the lower parts of this particular vertical intellectual stack, so that there is some really good quality work which is emerging. And that's kind of my contribution to the muse which I am involved in. And I believe that this can not only result in a healthy business practices which architects unfortunately do not get right, but it also can result in really good quality professional practice where as a profession you have been very honest and contributed instead of just giving lip services to things like sustainability and climate change and what have you. And then turns out that you are so caught up in your own little firefighting exercises in your own office. You say one thing, but when you actually went and practiced it, you did something else. Architecture is a very fundamental subject, and I don't think the audience of this particular video needs to be told that. So if there is going to be some basic seminal improvement in that subject which affects society, it can affect the large part of society of ordinary architecture which is coming out in any such society, then the entire society will have a ripple effect, and the entire society, they will have a better chance of doing something really better for our future and for our future generations. So this is the way I look at TAD. TAD is definitely a very different kind of software. It doesn't work like regular software, and don't shoot me because of that. We architects are supposed to be inventors. We are the probably the only formally trained inventors, because we have to invent a new solution for each project which we get. We cannot plonk the same building at every project which we get. So I'm a little surprised why that TAD, being quite different from regular architectural software, should create so much amount of consternation in some quarters. Actually, TAD is getting adopted by many architects all over the world. I'm just trying to increase the exposure and understanding of how you could look at TAD. In case you're not looking at TAD, you have looked at it and say, oh, it just doesn't work like AutoCAD, it doesn't work like Revit, so just let me put it aside. There is this notion that, I may not get proper training on that, or I won't get trained staff on that. But right now the community is growing pretty rapidly, and I'm hoping that this chicken and egg situation which is there will get solved, where the community itself rises up to the occasion to support a project of this nature. Okay, so that's one major reason why we should look at TAD as a basic fundamental force to improve the quality for bulk of architecture by ordinary architects doing ordinary projects. And where does this lead to your own aspirations? Of course, it will not destroy your aspirations. It will not say, no, you cannot do creative things, or you cannot do generative geometry at all, or you cannot do something like what Zaha Hadid did, or whoever else is your favorite architect who is doing something which has caught your attention. Architecture is actually a very intricate subject. It has got a huge amount of data which needs to be handled, and in today's world there's a whole lot of parameters which needs to be juggled. And imagine the plight of a three-person office if he's going around designing something, he or she is good designing something. If all he or she had as just those three people who are there in the office to understand what is going on in that particular project, do you think really without any great assistance that architects has any great game chance of delivering some amount of better quality than what that firm was doing yesterday? No, most likely they will be dawdling around in the same kind of work which they've been doing for years, and that's what's been the current status quo for many architects in developing countries. So, what we need to understand is that tools do make a lot of difference. The tools are the way by which you represent that particular design before the design is up. Today there is a whole lot of buzz about building information modeling or BIM processes, which is highly advertised and marketed by big software companies. It costs a bloody bomb, and the software is also pretty complicated to use, and those software really do need a lot of training. But I believe that that's been something which is, I mean, I've got other videos which explain what are the deficiencies in that. The actual adoption amongst the bulk of architects, this type of one person and three-person offices and five-person offices, bulk of them really do not get to use because they can't even afford such BIM software. And when they do use it, they cannot afford to have that software draining their resources and straining their computers. And it really is a very expensive lot, because it's not just the software which costs, but the hardware on which that software has to run is also very costly. I was talking to a friend of mine in US, a simple architect over there. He's got his own nice little firm, and he's saying that he has to think three times, four times before he employs anybody new, because the moment a person is employed, you need to give him or her computer and the software associated with it. So the cost of that particular new person in the office is not just that person's salary, but also this additional cost of software, hardware. It almost comes down to almost $7,000 a month just for all the additional things which needs to be done for that new employee. So all these small offices, three-person and five-person offices, are not really in a position to even adopt such BIM practices. And even if they do, I have a lot of theoretical reason. I'm a theoretician in this area, and I've been submitting papers, and I have my objections, and there are other resources which will explain why I object to the current way of looking at BIM. Nevertheless, BIM is useful when the design has become a B, which is a building, and there it has become useful for sure, because there are systems which which can have a single model and then use that model to construct a building. If you really look at all the advocates of BIM, you'll find that they are actually not from the architecture industry, means the industry of architects. It's actually from the engineers who are actually taking the models from architects and getting that building constructed. So in that phase of the architectural life cycle, BIM possibly is very useful. And I do not have any quarrels over there. But what I do have quarrels is that why are we as architects, when before the design has become a building, why are we forcing ourselves to use this such expensive and complicated software which drains your resources? And that's the part which it hopes to occupy, and it occupies pretty well. Though I am also a simple architect, but I have done pretty complicated works. I was very young when I was fortunate to get an important commission from the Konkan Railway Corporation, which is they had really complicated demands on me, on my office, and that rose up to the occasion to satisfy them. And I've done several different kind of projects. In terms of square footage, my office is not done very large number of square footage of work compared to what people currently are doing, but the number of projects which I've done is enormous because of the nature of the way development happens in this particular city where I work from, which is Navi Mumbai. Those days Navi Mumbai was the largest city in the entire world, and there was furious construction which was going on. A lot of these marshes got converted into plots of lands, and this plots of lands were, some of them were as small as 75 square meters, 100 square meters, bulk of them were around 750,000 square meters. And I did a huge lot of those projects. I'm not saying that I did a great job there, but I think I did a much better job than anybody else who would have not been able to use TAD. So because of TAD, I was able to work out various alternatives and give the best possible situation for that particular context which was there those days. And I also did complicated projects. So TAD has seen all this, and I'm hoping that the people listening to this particular video will understand where I'm coming from and why TAD is in place. And it requires your particular participation for this. Let's support each other to understand how to get this whole ecology going. And it is really a very important part of this entire gamut of software which is presented to architects. Don't just look at it as, oh, some tool I have to use, I'll just use whatever tool which is available. Tools do make a lot of difference. The reason why humans are identified to be different animals than other animals is because of tool usage. That's a very fundamental part of us being a human. So it's not something which you can just casually say, no, I'll just use whatever tool which is there, which I'm familiar with. This is a question which needs to be really understood and internalized. And I'm not trying to hard sell TAD here, but I'm trying to expose to you the context, the socio-economical context inside which this world is working, in which developing countries are playing a big role in the way the future of this world will emerge. So that's the overall context. I can give you a lot more references. This is not something which just came out of thin air. Of course, it came from my experience as an architect, and but experience can be a very distorting mistress. But it also came from a lot of other sources, Nobel Prize winners who opined on these topics, and I can give you references in my blogs and articles which I've written, which explains why is it so important that as architects, that lower part of the stack has to work together with real consistent amount of expressing their knowledge in a way by which it can be properly criticized before that design becomes a building. It's a long haul, I know that. It's not that like I've done solved everything, and obviously the reason why I'm making such a video is because I've not solved everything. And I'm hoping that this mission does take a lot more momentum than what it has already done. I'm really grateful that without any great marketing, I don't have any money to spend on marketing and all, and it has naturally and organically grown till here. I just thought that I should take this opportunity first to thank all of you who are indeed using TAD, but also to invite others to really participate in this particular movement. There are many things to be discussed. I even talk about the open source movement in architecture and how architecture should be exposing their internal mechanisms for criticism, just like the way it happened with software, where software developers open up the software before the software gets finalized. It's a pretty good parallel. It's not a metaphor, it's a parallel. That happens to improve software considerably, and that has been very well argued and tested, and the same I believe should happen in architecture also. So there are many important topics to be discussed in this new world of architecture which we are coming into. Architects generally tend to be in little silos with each other. So what I do in my office generally is not fully known by some other office. Not just that, each of our project is also in its own silo. So if there's an architect who has done multiple housing societies, the chance of that particular architectural firm exchanging information about or knowledge about one housing society they did and then use it in another housing project is actually quite less, other than some superficial comparisons of areas or something like that. But if you really want to get into the meat of the matter and really talk about things like sustainability and ecology and climate awareness and climate sensitivity, there is no framework which is currently available. We all have to pore over the drawings which we have. We roll out the drawings, then a lot of heads pore over those drawings and then examine those drawings. And And that's not really good enough. The world has become really complicated. So amongst the people who have to pour over, you have to also have people, virtual people who are like artificial intelligence agents who has to look at your data and opine and give out objective values for you to work on. So that's the mission which TAD is about. TAD is a simple software. It works very differently for a lot of very important reasons why it is working differently. But it helps in the design process and at the design product when it becomes a building. I have no quarrels with existing BIM software and even computer aided drafting software. At that level, it is all fine. But before that, before it reaches that, we need to really have good quality arguments in the office and amongst and between offices, and only then that vertical put to stack will really come out with healthy food. So I hope this particular talk has been useful for you and you are able to understand how that came into existence and where it is headed. So in a few years, I'm hoping that 60-70% of people who are not really getting attended to will get a really good community support from all over the world to improve architecture right from the ground up. It's not just a metaphor, that's how it is going to happen. All the ordinary architecture, even if it improves a little bit, the extraordinary notable projects which is there at the top of the stack, which some fortunate people do get, they will also come up with really good work. And that good work includes good professional practice but also good business practices. So it's not that you just have to do all this idealistically. When you do all your calculations right, you will actually stand to make good money also. So it's not that I'm trying to tell people to compromise on their money making capabilities in their office, but instead I'm saying that it is high time that we looked at our practices very intensely and bringing in all this new knowledge which all these economists and others whom I quote, all these Nobel Prize winners and their theories. It is high time that we put all those into practice and then come up with our own offerings. That's how we will leave really good quality work for our next generations and hopefully heal this damaged world and heal ourselves. Thank you so much.